Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryonna Cablay, and we will be presenting with my group. We will be presenting about the topic of utilitarianism, which explores a unique perspective on morality, principles, applications, and criticisms of utilitarianism as well. So, what is utilitarianism? Utilitarianism is an ethical theory which claims that right and wrong were determined by focusing on the outcomes of actions and choices. The maxim of this type of ethics is choose the greatest good for the greatest number of people. When it is applied in the choices of social, economy, and politics, this philosophy aspires for the betterment of society as a whole. In understanding utilitarianism, it is rooted in the works of philosophers such as Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart. It is a form of consequentialism that is focused on the result of an action or choices. It is said to be good if it promotes happiness or pleasure, and wrong if it produces unhappiness or pain for both the agent and the individuals affected by the action. This can be applied in every sector in the society as it makes the leaders decide between the choices for the betterment of its citizens. This can be through human activity in the context of social, economic, and political aspects. So let's talk about the key figures, which are Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Jeremy Bentham is an English philosopher and social reformer. He is often regarded as the founder of utilitarianism. He developed the principle of utility, which suggests that the right course of action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. John Stuart Mill, on the other hand, is a prominent 19th century philosopher and political economist. He expanded upon the ideas of Bentham. He emphasized the qualitative aspects of happiness and introduced the concept of higher and lower pleasures. Mill argued that intellectual and moral pleasures are superior to physical pleasures. Now, what is the nature of utilitarianism? Utilitarianism answers the practical question, what ought a person do? The nature and idea of utilitarianism focuses on what a person should do. The answer is that a person should act accordingly while maximizing the happiness or pleasure to minimize the pain or unhappiness in its result. In utilitarianism, there are four elements, defining elements. It is composed of consequentialism, welfarism, impartiality, and aggregationism. These elements form the philosophical stature upon which utilitarianism stands, shaping how we evaluate moral decisions and prioritize outcomes. Now, let's start with consequentialism. Consequentialism evaluates the rightness or wrongness of actions based solely on their outcomes or consequences, rather than the intentions behind the actions themselves. Therefore, to examine whether to perform an action or not, an individual should look at its overall consequences rather than the type of action executed. It's like judging whether a decision is good or bad based on what happened because of it, rather than what someone intended to happen. So if something turns out well, it's considered good. But if it doesn't, it's considered bad. Next is welfarism. In the element of welfarism and utilitarianism, only the welfare or the well-being of an individual or people measures the worth of an outcome. It means that what really matters is when we make decisions is how happy or well off people are. The goal is to make sure that as many people as possible are happy and not suffering because of our decisions. Next is impartiality. Being impartial means treating everyone fairly and equally, no matter who they are or where they came from. In utilitarianism, it's about making decisions that benefit everyone, everyone, no matter what nationality, gender, geographical location, or their educational background. It doesn't show any favoritism towards any particular group. Lastly is aggregationism. Aggregationism is treating everyone fairly and sorry. Aggregationism is about adding the happiness or the well-being of all people affected by its decision. It's like looking at a big picture and considering how everyone's happiness or suffering adds up to determine whether the decision is good or bad. The value of the world is the total of the values of other parts of the individuals involved, including their experiences, their lives, societies, and more. So, in simpler terms, utilitarianism looks at the outcome of the decisions, the results of the decision. It also cares about making people happy, it treats everyone fairly, and considers the overall happiness of everyone involved.
Hello, I am Garilao and I will be presenting principles of utilitarianism, problems with utilitarianism, and types of utilitarianism. Principles of utilitarianism. First, pleasure or happiness is the only thing that has an intrinsic value, and actions are judged based on their ability to maximize happiness and minimize pain. Regardless of if the action, motive, or intention of the performer was good or bad, the pleasure or happiness of the affected individuals must be prioritized and valued in the action's result. This means that happiness itself is seen as inherently good, regardless of any external factors. Actions are judged based on their ability to increase happiness and decrease pain or suffering. In simpler terms, if something makes people happy, it is seen as a good action. Second, actions are right if it fosters happiness, while wrong if they foster pain or unhappiness, regardless of the motives behind them. Utilitarianism includes a quality of moral actions decided by the measurement of its consequences. So, as long as the actions result in maximum benefits for the greatest number of people, utilitarianism doesn't care whether the motives or intentions were immoral. This means that actions are deemed right or wrong based solely on their ability to promote happiness or alleviate suffering. Whether the intentions behind an actions are good or bad is irrelevant in utilitarian ethics. What matters is the impact it has on the overall happiness of individuals. Third, the happiness of the majority was counted equally, emphasizing the importance of benefiting the greatest number of people. Few lives and some people's happiness were more significant and valuable than others. This principle makes the government accountable for creating policy that would benefit all of its citizens, not just the individuals in the upper class. If an action leads to greater overall happiness for the majority, it is considered morally right even if it may cause some unhappiness for a minority. Utilitarianism aims to maximize the collective happiness of society, prioritizing the well-being of the majority. Nextly, the problem with utilitarianism. Utilitarianism, though helpful in making ethical decisions, has some problems that we need to think about more carefully. Firstly, focus on outcome over actions. Utilitarianism is only concerned with the action's outcome regardless of the action itself. It focuses on the outcome of a choice instead on the act itself. In short, if the actions of a person resulted in great happiness, then it doesn't matter if few people thought it was wrong. It was still a moral choice to pursue because utilitarianism cares a lot about what happens because of an actions, sometimes more than the actions itself. For a short example, suppose that telling a lie could save many lives. Utilitarianism would advocate for people to tell lies since it results in overall good and promotes well-being, even if we all know that lying is morally and ethically wrong. Second, tyranny of the majority. The rights of the minority might not be taken into account, or also known as tyranny of the majority. One big worry about utilitarianism is that it might ignore the needs of small groups of people. It could happen that what most people want might not be fair for everyone. This could lead to unfairness or even harm to some people just because they are not in the majority. It is a system of majority rule in which the majority group prioritizes its own interests over those of a minority group, with no consideration for the minority's welfare or even rights. The principles of utilitarianism often contrast the rights of individuals and sometimes oppose the components of modern justices. This could possibly require us to violate a certain justice standard. When creating decisions that would positively affect a huge number of people, one must also think of its negative impact on the minority, particularly if it will infect their rights as an individual and fairness. Third, practical implementation challenges. Critics also state that utilitarianism was impossible to imply. One of the most criticisms of utilitarianism is that it was impossible to apply in real-world situations, since happiness cannot be measured or even quantified. An individual also can calculate or compare happiness to suffering. It is practical application conflicts with challenges and limitations. It is also that happiness is tricky to measure. What makes one person happy might not make another person happy. Also, different people might have different ideas about what's important. This makes it hard to figure if an action is really making most people happy. And also, when people have different needs and wants, it is tough to make everyone happy with just one decision. So, utilitarianism relies on the outcome of an action that is overall good and produces greatest overall utility. However, it cannot accurately measure overall utility or well-being since every individual has their own preferences, values, and interests, which may result into conflicts between different stakeholders. So for the types of utilitarianism, we have act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. There are different ways to use utilitarianism to make decisions, and each has its own strengths and weaknesses. Act utilitarianism looks at each action on its own and decides if it is good or bad based on the results it brings. So, if an action leads to the most happiness, it is considered right even if similar actions in other situations might be wrong. It is a theory of utilitarianism which argues that the morality of an action is determined by its consequences to the people. In other words, an act is right if and only if it results in as much good as any available. On the other hand, rule utilitarianism looks at following rules that usually lead to the most happiness. Instead of looking at each action by itself, it follows general rules that usually make people happy. This way, there are clear rules to follow even if it means sometimes not doing the thing that might make most people happy. It is the type of utilitarianism which argues that an action is considered to be moral if it conforms to a particular rule which leads to the greatest good or greatest utility to society.
Thank you for that information. And now let me discuss the understanding act utilitarianism. Utilitarianism evaluates each individual action based on the principle of utility. It considers the consequences of each action and aims to maximize overall happiness. An act is considered right if it results in at least much of the overall well-being or utility of the majority, compared to the act that could possibly be performed by the agent. It is seen as the most natural interpretation of utilitarian ideals. If we want to produce the best result, we must critically decide what is the right thing to do while considering few options, including outcome prediction and performing the act that will produce the good of the majority. In any situation, a performer is considered to act rightly if he or she attained the maximum overall good well-being. For instance, if the lethal injection saves the majority of people by killing criminals, the majority may feel relief or safer, then this act is considered right based on utilitarianism. Compared to the other theory in utilitarianism, the morality in the utilitarianism is on the influence of a good action, which benefits the most people. Its consequences were also based on the action performed. Compared to the rule utilitarianism, which was based on the rules followed, the consequences of utilitarianism was based on the action, while its morality was on its good impact, which benefits the majority. Next is principle of utility. The principles of utility states that actions are morally right if they produce the greatest amount of happiness or pleasure and minimize suffering or pain for the greatest number of people. Utilitarianism focuses on the specific action taken in a particular situation, rather than adhering to the predetermined rules or principles. Number 1. Greatest happiness. In utilitarianism, the pleasure or positive utility must be seen and maximized like the improvement of well-being. It focuses on decision that aims for the greatest happiness of the society. Number 2. Neutrality. Examining each of action with fairness, without bias or prejudice, this should always reach an ethically responsible outcome. And number 3, consequentialism. The morality of outcome were judged based on the result or consequences. It also pushes people to view beyond their own interests for the common good. Next is differentiating act and rule utilitarianism. While utilitarianism evaluates action individually, rule utilitarianism advocates for following rules or principles that, when universally applied, leads to the greatest overall happiness. Other than that, utilitarianism also examines each action based on its usefulness, while the rule utilitarianism examines action based on its usefulness but based on the rules which govern it. Compared to the utilitarianism that focuses on each action and enables flexibility in decision making, the rule utilitarianism was focused on a long-term benefit as well as gives clear and consistent guidelines for decision making. In short, while utilitarianism helps with tough choices, we need to be careful about its focus on outcomes, making sure everyone's needs are considered, and understanding the different ways we can use it to make fair decisions. Next is emphasis on consequences versus emphasis on rules. Utilitarianism prioritizes the consequences of action, whereas rule utilitarianism emphasizes following rules that are likely to produce the greatest overall happiness.
I'm Lakeshia Gillana and I will be discussing the arguments for utilitarianism and its ethical dilemma. Let's start. Arguments for utilitarianism. Number 1. Superiority over traditional and rule-based moralities. It is better than traditional and rule-based moralities. Utilitarianism stands in contrast to traditional and rule-based moralities by rejecting fixed moral rules. It argues that actions should be judged based on their consequences, rather than adhering to predetermined rules. This flexibility allows for a more nuanced approach to moral decision-making, where the consequences of each actions are carefully considered. Number 2. Objectivity of moral judgment. Utilitarianism makes moral judgment objectively true. Utilitarianism offers the possibility of objectively true moral judgment. Unlike subjective moral theories that relies on individual beliefs or desires, utilitarianism proposes that moral questions can have objectively true answers based on their consequences. This objective approach provides clarity and consistency in moral reasoning. Number 3. Potential for incorrect moral answers. Utilitarianism sometimes gives wrong answers to moral questions. One of the criticisms given against utilitarianism is its potential to provide incorrect moral answers. By prioritizing the maximization of overall happiness, utilitarianism may justify actions that are commonly considered morally wrong. This raises concern about the reliability of utilitarianism in guiding ethical behavior. Number 4. Demands of impartiality. Utilitarianism is too demanding. Utilitarianism places significant demands on individuals to act impartially and consider the interests of all parties involved. This requirement for impartiality can be challenging as it may conflict with personal biases and preferences. Additionally, utilitarianism's emphasis on equal consideration of interests may impose burdensome obligations on individuals. Utilitarianism to ethical dilemma. Ethical dilemmas and decision making. Utilitarianism provides a framework for resolving ethical dilemma by evaluating the consequences of each possible actions and choosing the one that maximizes overall happiness. The policies of an environment is a good example of utilitarianism application through a consideration of all living organisms such as human and ecosystems. Ethical dilemmas and decision making. Utilitarianism may be applied to any ethical dilemma. One of them is in our environment, for instance, the balancing of economic growth and sustainability of the environment. Through implementation of policies, laws, and regulation regarding the maximization of human activities that may damage the environment, the majority of all living things, including humans and our surrounding as well as the economy, will benefit. The impact of global warming would be reduced, enabling us to live longer and the future generation to experience the beauty of the environment. Mandatory vaccination during COVID-19 pandemic. To reduce the spread of COVID-19 virus, the government in each country in the world reinforced a law that would push the survivors to be vaccinated. Fortunately, it produced a good outcome for a great number of people as it eradicated the spread of virus around the world and made individuals live normally again. Demolition of houses to highway or road improvement. The authorities were always deciding to demolish the houses of informal settlers when they wanted to facilitate road construction around the area. In some situations, the engineering sector decided to demolish a few houses that stands in the way of the construction of road or government establishment. This creates more benefits to more people as it allows them to have easy access to work every day as well as quicken the transfer of goods and product compared to other few informal settlers who lose their house.
Thank you for that. And I will be the last presenter. I am Sheryl Bofill, and we're going to talk about examples of act utilitarianism. So we have listed five. First would be refusing to accept bribes. Second would be refraining from revenge. Third is investing on renewable resources. Fourth would be refraining from eating meats. And lastly is paying taxes. So, first one, let's talk about refusing to accept bribes. So, by refusing and accepting bribes, police and other authorities may act properly based on act utilitarianism as they prevent any possible damage caused if bribery was allowed to spread, normalized, or institutionalized within a nation. And second one is refraining from revenge. By refraining from revenge is also an example of act utilitarianism. Why? Because it also avoids possible damage that could have long-term negative impact on both sides involved. And this also reduces the further harm and allows the parties to focus on peacefully solving the issue. Third would be investing on renewable resources. So, why is this also an example of act utilitarianism? Because by investing in renewable resources promotes sustainability and poses positive influences on humanity. Therefore, it is a good example of act utilitarianism. Well, by investing in renewable resources, individuals can have jobs, and this also reduces the dependency on harmful fossil fuels that damages our environment and surroundings. So, example would be what we're experiencing right now, unlike before. Mas mainit talaga ngayon kesa noon. So, next would be, or the fourth one, is refraining from eating meats. It is an example of act utilitarianism because it reduces the suffering of animals by lowering the demands for meat products, while also reducing the carbon emissions, land use necessary for livestock production, and of course, it's to keeping a healthy lifestyle as well. Well, we're moving on with the last one would be paying taxes. So, paying taxes helps in funding significant services for a country or our country and economy to prosper. So, by contributing money to our government, allows an individual to work towards the common good of the nation by making sure that every citizen receives resources necessary to attain a better quality of life, and that's why paying taxes is also an example of act utilitarianism. And to conclude or to summarize the topic, so first is utilitarianism judges actions based on their consequences, aiming to maximize overall happiness. So, key figures in utilitarianism include Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Act utilitarianism evaluates individual action based on the principle of utility, so focusing on maximizing happiness. Rule utilitarianism emphasizes following rules that lead to the greatest overall happiness. So, critics of act utilitarianism include challenges in protecting consequences and concerns about moral integrity. Act utilitarianism can be applied to ethical dilemmas by considering the consequences of each action. And so, lastly, is contemporary perspective on utilitarianism addresses critics and adapt the theory to modern ethical debates. So, we have reflections on act utilitarianism's relevance. Despite its critiques, act utilitarianism remains relevant in contemporary ethics or ethics itself, providing a framework for decision making and also addressing complex moral dilemmas. So, in its emphasis on consequences and the pursuit of overall happiness continues to inform ethical discourse and guide moral reasoning. So, in conclusion, act utilitarianism offers a flexible and objective approach to moral decision making, focusing on the consequences of actions and the maximization of overall happiness. While facing challenges and criticisms like what we've mentioned before, act utilitarianism provides valuable insights into ethical behavior and guides individuals in promoting the common good. So, as we encounter moral dilemmas, we can also consider the principles of act utilitarianism and try to make choices that improve the well being of all. Nonetheless, act utilitarianism really remains relevant in ethical discourse. So, offering insights into the context of moral reasoning and, of course, the pursuit of greatest overall happiness. That's all. Thank you for listening.